All right, thank you so much for joining us. I am Hernandez with the Hispanic Collaborative. I want to thank you for giving us a few minutes of your day today in December of what is turning out to be a fantastic, memorable year for all of us. I want to share with all of our participants today, we are doing a format for our meeting in Zoom as a meeting, not as a webinar, because we are going to go into breakouts at the end of it. So we're going to ask, if you are not presenting today, please keep your video off and your sound muted during the program. That will assist us and make sure that we've got attention on our presenters. The first thing that I want to do today is just give us a quick summary of our activities throughout the year. And, you know, as you can recall, this year was the first year that we recalculated our Hispanic Well-Being Index. And Milwaukee moved from 39th against 50 of our peer cities to 44. If you recall, it was really in the beginning of the pandemic that we gave that briefing and what actually had happened. And while we had improved in about 18 of 20 of the variables that we keep track of in our community, we did not improve as much or faster than our peer cities, and our ranking dropped across many of those same 18 variables. So we are 44th, but the one thing that it did show us is that there were some cities that saw double-digit increases in their ranking, and many of those were achieved through big increases in median household income. So our strategies of working on upskilling and reskilling our population, getting families and individuals into better career earning trajectories, and also by default helping fulfill some of the demand and needs in those types of careers that are needed within our community is the right track for us to be on. So we will be doing, as we get our planning legs back about us right now, coming from the middle of this COVID pandemic year, we will be doing some research in those cities where we saw those double-digit increases and see if there are some specific programs and initiatives that we could bring here to Milwaukee to assist with that process. Other pieces that we have done, the collaborative this year, while still looking at the lens of our strategic priority, we have focused on advocacy for community and community-based organizations doing the work in our community and really sharing the story of what is happening in the Latino community. I'm happy to say that we have raised over $200,000 in support, direct support for families and businesses. And we're very grateful to the community-based partners that really helped get that into the hands of needy families and businesses just trying to make it during this time frame. We also helped influence the $2 million minority business grants that were done by the state to be open to ITIN businesses. And as we know that 60% of our Latino-owned businesses are immigrant-owned, having that portion, those grant dollars available to ITIN businesses was very important. Through our community and listening sessions, we also felt framing what the investment in community is and doing ongoing research was necessary to continue to tell that story. We have a community research project that is closing out this month, or for the past 4 months, our research teams have been surveying Latino households and businesses to understand what the true economic impact is of COVID-19. And through our listening sessions, we have also strung together our Road to Recovery, which handles, is over 4 areas: education, health, financial stability, and business, and weaves key issues that we need to address as a Latino community in order to ensure that we are on the right track for full recovery and we do not end up growing disparities during this recovery session from this pandemic. The last piece that I'll share, just in summary of what we've been doing, bringing us together and being the role of a convener goes hand in hand with what the collaborative does. And so our community coordination meetings that we held weekly and then moving to bi-weekly to stay on top of the health issues in our community, sharing the resources that were available and giving ourselves the best ability to pivot and collaborate were an important part and something that we continue right now monthly and will continue to do so into 2021. Webinars and briefings, either from needed topic and or Spanish language opportunities, such as walking through folks through PPP loans. Because of the DACA opening, we will have a DACA application webinar actually later today. But most importantly, we will have that recording available up for schools to share with their segments after today. And so those are some of the important type of work that we've been doing about bringing us together, sharing information, and ensuring that we are able to leverage each other's knowledge and resources in doing our planning work. Today, however, what we wanted to bring to you was a glimpse of some things that we definitely see are very relevant and very important to our work at the Hispanic Collaborative. 2020 has been a year that has allowed us to reflect on who we are as a community, reflect on who we are and who we want to be and how we've been doing business. And while the desire to improve outcomes, it has always been present and a driving force in Milwaukee, amongst our civic organizations, amongst our institutions, our chambers of commerce, our philanthropic communities. 2020 has solidified this as a year where many initiatives have taken more form, more vigor, and more forward-looking, all-encompassing efforts behind key pieces that really dovetail with many of the goals and efforts of the Hispanic Collaborative. And we wanted to share those with you today, share some of who those leaders are, and share a glimpse into those major initiatives to ensure that you know how they coincide with the work that you are doing and your organizations. For without knowing about them, we cannot leverage them as a community. And we feel that your input and your guidance and your insight with your direct knowledge of community is definitely very important to those initiatives and how they go about doing their work. So this is the start of a conversation. It is not the end of a conversation, and it is not a singular event. So you will definitely hear more about these things, but we're happy to have 4 presenters with us today that will talk about 4 really big initiatives in our community. Each of them will present for a few minutes on their initiative to give you a glimpse of what that is. If you have questions, we want you to go ahead and put those into the chat, and we will ask 1 or 2 questions, time allowing, after each presentation. At the end of our session today, what we're going to do is go into breakouts to have a discussion about what you heard today and how do you think we need to act on what you heard today and how each of you want to get more involved with some of these initiatives. So that's what we're going to do in terms of our time together today. So for our first presenter, we're going to roll right into it. Our first presenter is a gentleman that is probably very familiar to many of you. He is Mark Mone and the president of the chancellor, excuse me, of UW-Milwaukee, which is an institution that has helped shape many Latino leaders in Milwaukee and continues to have some of the largest numbers of Latino college students looking to improve their lot and a lot of their families. And so Mark is created an organization called HERA, and an initiative, and that is what he is going to share with you today. Mark, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I am going to bring up your presentation to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nancy. It's an honor to work with you. You know, we're so fortunate in this community to have your leadership working with MMAC. And, you know, I'm going to steal one of Tim Sheehy's lines. What we're talking about, and I think what captures your conversations, is that it's not a moment, it's not a one-off event, but it's really a more fundamental movement. Sorry, Tim, I know you'll probably use that same idea, but really, you're really talking about a collaborative effort. And that's why it's such a great honor for me to be able to talk to so many leaders in the audience today. And as you mentioned, there's a number of people who do know about the Higher Ed Regional Alliance, but I imagine a number who don't. So let me just jump right into it. We call this group HERA, Higher Ed Regional Alliance. And if you go to the next slide, you can see who the members are. And what's powerful about this group is that you have every single academic institution in the 7-county region that is a 2-year, 4-year, public or private. Look across the top 3 rows and you see every single academic institution that is serving the college students in this region. But more important than just the higher ed working together is really the 11 community partners. And this is not exhaustive, but these are the folks that are at the steering committee. And you'll notice Hispanic Collaborative is there, as well as the Hispanic professionals of Greater Milwaukee, Milwaukee Urban League, Elevation, a number of groups. Now, we are looking, we'll always continue to bring new partners in, but there's also a lot of groups behind the work that there's a lot of other individuals represented. But the point of this slide is that the issues facing this region, whether it's economic prosperity for Latinx populations, others left behind, whether it's filling the talent pipeline needs for all our employers in this region, whether it's the larger economic development, whatever it happens to be, those issues are so large and so important that none of us alone can really address them adequately. That's why it's so critical to have, as you can see, M7, MMAC, Greater Milwaukee Committee, and others. Julia Taylor has been absolutely instrumental and a terrific leader in terms of helping us as we've shaped the architecture from the early days on. So I want to give a shout out, of course, to Julie's leadership on that front. So this is something that really we think is important to have this footprint as we go forward. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the 3 major goals. This answers the question, so what are you guys really trying to achieve here? And I'm going to talk about some of the results that we've achieved in each of these 3 areas. Number 1, the big issue here is around college completion, isn't it? We know from work that's been done by the Hispanic Collaborative that we have population of Hispanics that are overrepresented in occupations that are under 40,000, underrepresented in occupations above that. What's one of the key ways, the key mechanisms to help overcome that? It's through education. We have left simply too many people behind in this region. So that equity gap, that is the difference between individuals in non-Hispanic, non-African-American populations has been something that we see a gap in. It starts in high school. It actually starts earlier. And there's a number of initiatives in the community that are working on that. And we've linked up and paired with some of those. And many of us participate in those, whether it's Milwaukee Succeeds, Gear Up, City Milwaukee, a number of different initiatives that we're working on. But really, we're asking the question from a higher ed perspective, how do we get to 60% of this region's population, which we're well short of that right now. We're actually in the low 40s across this region in terms of individuals with 2-year and 4-year degrees. But how do we also close that gap? So we've got a strong equity focus as we approach our work. The second goal, institutional programs. This is how we work together across higher ed. So For example, a lot of two-year college students think, oh, I want to become a police officer or a nurse or an engineer. And they find there's a huge roadblock when they go to a four-year academic institution. Costs them more time, costs them more money because the courses don't transfer. So we've instituted several programs, and we have greased the pathways in a powerfully effective way. The third goal is aligning our work better with employers. So we've created a 40-member industry forum, and we have good linkages, as I mentioned, with M7, with GMC, and others that we're fortifying and really looking at both sides of the equation. How do students access employers, but also how do employers access students? Next slide, please. What you can see here in the next slide, of course, is some of the indicators of the work that we've already seen. We're only 2 years in, but take a look at the progress here. This is really important. In addition to overall retention rates that have increased, you can see, and there's a lot of like, whoa, what is all that? a lot of gibberish here in terms of triangles and circles. Take a look at the first column. This is really important. This shows you in terms of retention, students who are declaring majors. And what you can see across Asian, Black, non-Hispanic, and Hispanic increases in the first year of students declaring majors. Absent that, absent a declared major, students are kind of like without rudders. So this is a really important indicator of future success. Then from a retention, we've seen an increase, and these numbers usually don't change dramatically year to year, but they all add up. So first to second year retention, you can see the numbers in terms of the positivity there. But here's the big grabber right here, excess credits. The number of students who are taking less credits that can get through their degrees faster is about 5.7%. This translates into almost 2 classes less. So students are having to take fewer classes in part because they declare majors, but there's also a number of other ways that we get at this. So students can really save time and money getting through faster. Next slide, please. And by the way, you can see the website, and you're welcome to have this slide deck, but I encourage you to take a look at our website where this data and a lot more is in there. In fact, this slide you can drill down into. This is the first time, because we have HERA today, this is the first time that you can see, if you're an employer in this region, where are students graduating, what are their majors across all of these academic institutions, and then you can really drill into this by major and look at this in quite a bit of depth. We had not been able to accumulate this before to be able to answer the question, how many software engineers, how many nurses, how many 2-year, 4-year folks at different degree levels. You can also see it by race and gender type. So across the top, what you can see is across the last 4 years, these institutions are responsible for having 104,000 graduates. Now, within that, we know we do not have enough achievement for all groups. And that's exactly one of the issues that we're so happy to be working on collectively. In fact, we're bringing people together in January, and Nancy has been a great sounding board as we've talked about putting something together that really answers the question, how can we better engage community-based organizations and other partners on these matters? Next slide, please. We, through the industry forum, asked in the first quarter in January, and then we came back again in July. And as you know, in 2020, those were 2 very different time points in the world in terms of where people were at. We asked industry in this region, what are some of the most critical competencies that are needed? And you can see an awful lot of overlap in these areas. In fact, there's only a couple of small differences as you get down toward the bottom, but the things that continue to be on both lists are critical thinking, emotional intelligence, communication, is some of the core things. So what have we done with this? We have created a badging program. 7 of the academic institutions in this region have partnered on critical thinking, and we're putting together a online critical thinking badging program as a certificate, as a way to think about that. And I believe on this call, we actually have Phyllis King, who's been one of the people working with Higher Ed Regional Alliance to spearhead the work across these academic institutions. So final slide, please. What have been some of the results in terms of this region working together? Well, I can tell you in the top left, that Complete College America, we competed with 45 regions across the country for a grant to get technical assistance for increased completion across all the groups attending for all students. We're one of only 3 to receive, and so far we've received $300,000 in technical assistance. Lower left, The Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation has said for a long time they have wished that they could see more collaboration between academic institutions and industry in this area. They supported us with a $100,000 two-year grant. And then finally, on the right-hand side, one of the things that I'm very, very proud of is that a number of the academic institutions in this region have come together and joined as the first region in the country, the equity mindset of the Education Advisory Board called the Moonshot for Equity. We have a goal to completely eliminate, not reduce by 3 or 12%, completely eliminate the achievement gap by 2030. Each institution has signed up. We're very public about this. UW-Milwaukee, Milwaukee Area Technical College, UW-Parkside, and Carthage College are leading this effort. Other campuses we know will join us. One of the first things we've been doing is taking a look at where every campus is at, and we're looking at where our equity-minded practices are, and we're engaging in training. We're using change management. We're looking at technology assistance and best practices to really help those outcomes. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to provide an overview, and Nancy, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really like that the goal is completely eliminate disparities, not reduce it by 3%. So that's definitely something I think that's getting everybody excited. We have time for one question for you, and the question that we have is, can you talk a little bit about what you presented here with HERA relates to the goal of many of the institutions to become HSIs or Hispanic serving institutions?
Absolutely, great question. You know, you mentioned earlier the number of Hispanic students that are at UW-Milwaukee, and we're on a quest. I know that Alberto Maldonado, who heads that effort up for us, is on the call right now. He works very closely with Patricia and the HERA. They're doing great things, and the numbers for us are already quite large. We're a very diverse institution. But we know we can do better. And I think that's the spirit of every single academic institution. And we've had a number of convenience across the region with many areas that are sharing best practices. They're looking at how do we raise the boat for all, that rising tide lifts all boats. How do we put in place better advising, better financial support, better programs that are both important academically, but also the types of support outside, socioeconomic, sociocultural, the types of things that really do enhance our opportunities for all of our students to become successful. Many of you know that to become a Hispanic serving institution, we need to have 25% of our undergraduate population that's serving Latinx students. We at UWM are about 13%. We're close to becoming that 15% initial marker. We expect, and I don't want to put Alberto Maldonado on the spot, but I think that we would say probably within the next year or two, we'll hit a great milestone at 15%. And then we just keep charging on for that. This mirrors already what's happening in the region in terms of the Hispanic population, but we need to accelerate that. We can't just wait for this to naturally occur. So that's what many of our efforts are doing. And so that's what's happening with many of the academic institutions across the region. Alverno has achieved it. Marquette and UWM are comparable in terms of percentage of students that we're working with. So those are some of the initial thoughts in terms of what HERA is doing and many of the aspirations of the academic institutions, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Mark. We are, I believe Mark might join us again for later for some of our breakout sessions, but we are going to go and introduce our next speaker, which is Julia Taylor. So Julia Taylor is not a stranger to community work, certainly through the GMC. Even though many of the folks that she works with on a daily basis are businesses, their goal is to impact community. And prior to her time frame with the Greater Milwaukee Committee, she spent many years at the helm with YWCA. So our community is very happy to have Julia with us, and it shows what some of the key initiatives that have come out of the GMC and how they aim to impact community. So Julia is here to talk a bit about some of the initiatives, because there are a few of them that are important to this group at the GMC. So Julia, I've got your PowerPoint ready to go.
Okay, well, and I want to say also, thank you, Nancy, for everything you do. You've been an amazing connector with both the Hispanic Collaborative and before the Collaborative. But I think actually some of the programming I'm going to be talking about, you've ensured that the Collaborative has been well connected to it. And I appreciate all that you do to keep carrying that message forward.
Thank you.
So let's go to the first slide. And so this is basically the GMC's mission is to make Milwaukee the best place to live, learn, work, play, and stay. And I think we need to add a tagline on that that says for everyone, because we do know that there are a number of inequities in our community that is keeping Milwaukee from being the best place to live, learn, work, play, and stay. Can you go to the next slide? One of the things that I think has come out of this past year with a huge disruption of COVID has also been somewhat of a racial reckoning for Milwaukee, an understanding that we do have these inequities and that we have to create change from the inside out to really change Milwaukee, change ourselves. So we recently formed this Racial Equity and Inclusion Committee. Our board formed the committee in September, and the goal of it is to become and encourage our members to be anti-racist organizations. And a big part of that, because I think language is important and common language is the anti-racist is really to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups, and to act accordingly. Part of what we want to see come out of that is to both leverage our influence to achieve measurable change throughout our region's racial disparity metrics. We have 200 influential members that can help do that. Let's go to the next slide. And I want to, first I want to say there's two things on here when we're talking about language. One is numbers. Numbers are important because they do show what's happened with diversity and what's the presence of difference within a given setting. But the other part that's important is equity. Because equity is talking about what is the strategy or the approach that ensures everyone access to the same opportunities. So one of our areas of work over the past few years has been the Commons, which is actually also working some with HERA, certainly working with the Hispanic Collaborative. And part of the focus of the Commons is that we know that Black, Brown, and first generation college students and young professionals do not have the access to the same professional networks as their peers. So part of the work of the Commons and Forward 48 is to help level that playing field and create more of an equitable space to connect students to both Milwaukee area companies, to contacts in the community, and to build a career network. And as you can see and these are numbers that are actually accumulated over the years, 50% of the students are actually split down the middle by both gender as well as racial diversity. And we have 30% are first generation students, college students. Can we go to the next slide? So this is part of the Commons. It's a virtual accelerator program. And it actually is one that directly connects college students as cohorts across the 21 universities. In with the different colleges, in with different businesses. And actually we hosted a session with the Hispanic Collaborative last fall that focused on recent college graduates. And I will say we did see a significant increase in the number of Hispanic participants in that fall program. So thank you, Nancy, for that. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, Forward 48. This is actually a fairly new program for us. We started it this fall, and it really is we basically asked for nominations. So we had 48 individuals who came through, 12% were Latino, looking at how can we create civic leadership succession in our community and ensure that it reflects the diversity of our community, but also equity. So we have a number of top business and community leaders, people like Thelma Sias. Rolando was, I think, one of our speakers that's been the most remarked on for his discussion on legacy. Bud Selig, a number of different people that have spoken at it to really talk about one-on-one what leadership is like and how people can move up into leadership. Some of the other things we've been able to do is we have up to 4 tuition scholarship credits available at Marquette from participants, as well as 6 months free membership at the University Club, which is, again, another part of being able to create that network. Can you go to the next slide? Another initiative we worked on for a number of years is Milwaukee United. It's a major collaborative effort with the City of Milwaukee, the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, the Urban League, and LISC. And we work with the Black and brown neighborhoods surrounding the downtown. One of the things we found with the prosperity of the downtown is that we did see a lot of rising property values, particularly when you went down in the area around Walker's Point, or if you went up towards Brewers Hill, Halyard Park. A lot of long-term homeowners in that area that were all of a sudden being priced out of their own neighborhoods. They couldn't afford the way the taxes were going up. Some cases, property values were going up 30% per year. So we were able to stand up an anti-displacement fund. It's in its 2nd year. It's helped around 111 households, but it's been an important initiative. But it's just one initiative. So we're also looking at some other equitable housing initiatives that are more resident-driven and resident investment oriented. So we continue to also work with Brew City Match through LISC, which pairs empty retail locations in commercial corridors with small businesses in those neighborhoods. And it's been a rough year in terms of trying to keep the businesses going, which I know was also reflected in your study that came out, Nancy. So can we go to the next slide? So the anti-displacement fund, to give you an idea of the impact it's had. So we had 111 homeowners in 2019. We actually have more than that have already gone through the first process this year. The grants range from $1,800 to $1,800 per home, which gives you an idea of the type of property tax increases people were seeing. We raised $400,000 the first year. We just raised another additional $100,000 for that fund. And we did see 36 Southside applications and 26 were approved. As you can see, it's having a big impact, particularly on people of color. And we had 45 Southside homeowners that were involved in this in 2019. And if you can go to the next slide. This is a Brew City Match where I talked about matching the entrepreneurs. Clark Square was one of the first areas that this rolled out in. So we had 3 rounds with 59 winners total in Clark Square. With 7 property owners that benefited from this. And since then, we've also awarded through Brew City Match $35,000 in COVID-related grants to help keep small businesses going. I think one of the other big issues that we've ran into here is the digital divide. And I know that Nicole's going to be talking about that a little bit later. But even applying for PPP loans, we saw that we had entrepreneurs that were trying to use their phones to apply for PPP loans, trying to develop online marketplaces. So this has been a big focus for both Brew City Match as well as another program of ours that's called Scale Up, is how do we help businesses not only survive in this time, but thrive in this time through overcoming the digital divide. So that's a little bit on our programming, and I'll be glad to turn it back over to you, Nancy.
Thanks, Julia. We have one quick question for you, which is you have a lot of CEOs and heads of key organizations as part of the GMC. What advice would you have for some of the folks on this call who want to continue to provide visibility to some of the programs and great work and need that is in the Hispanic community?
Well, I think continued education is important. I think the reports that you're bringing out are important, but I think, again, it goes back to some of the earlier discussion that we talked about with accessibility. So I think there's certainly more ways we can work with the Hispanic Collaborative to ensure that we can provide that visibility and accessibility to the talent that you have within your community.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today, Julia. And we are going to go to our next presenter. We're moving it right along. So Tim Sheehy, I get the pleasure to work with Tim quite a bit at the MMAC. The MMAC is our gracious host, but more so than a host or a housing for the Hispanic Collaborative. We find everyone at the MMAC to be great partners for the work that the Hispanic Collaborative is doing, and true believers in the shared goals and outcomes that we each seek for Milwaukee and the broader Hispanic community. So Tim is going to talk a little bit about the Region of Choice Initiative, which is a fantastic goal for our private sector to have, and I'm very proud that Tim and the MMAC are leading this. Tim, turning it over to you.
Thanks very much, Nancy. I appreciate the opportunity, and as you noted, we literally work together. So we're in the same office, and it's just a pleasure to have you engaged in the organization, the Hispanic Collaborative, and just influencing our work every day. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to answer the three questions that you laid out, which is, what are we trying to accomplish with the Region of Choice? How is it relevant to the Hispanic community? And what kind of role can we play in collaborating with the Hispanic Collaborative? So when I think of the Region of Choice, Nancy, I'm going to go back to the information that you laid out up front. And we've done similar work. And when you compare Metro Milwaukee to 20 other peer regions, we have the greatest disparity of any of those 20 peer regions when it comes to the economic prospects for African American and our Hispanic and Latino communities. And we also have the largest gap. So simply put, the Region of Choice is an effort to make Metro Milwaukee a region of choice for all, to close the economic disparities, and to raise the prosperity, in this case, of the Hispanic and Latino community. And we're focused on that. We've got really three pathways that we're investing in to make sure that this is a region of choice for all. So the first is working with companies to source, advance, and retain, in this case, again, Hispanic and Latino talent. The second pathway is really focused on improving the educational attainment and career development for Hispanic and Latino talent. And then the third pathway is focused on addressing wealth creation, again, in the Hispanic and Latino communities through better corporate partnerships and entrepreneurship. And so those are the three pathways that are driving towards this goal to make sure that Milwaukee is a region of choice for all. And it's really an economic imperative. So when we look back, the disparities in this region are long held, but they're also holding us back from our future. And so when we look at each of those areas, and I'll talk about each of them very briefly, in the first case, we have laid out some very specific goals. We have 110 companies now representing 140,000 people in the region that have signed a pledge, a Region of Choice pledge, to grow their management talent by 25% and grow their overall talent by 15% over the next 5 years, again, as it relates to Hispanic and Latino talent. So what that means specifically in our case is that we grow to almost 600 Hispanic and Latino managers in these companies, and we grow to close to 7,500 Hispanic or Latino employees. And the goal here is to get companies to share best practices, to collaborate, to look at ways that they can recruit both in Milwaukee and outside Milwaukee to reach those numbers. The second pathway is around education. When I look at the top performing regions across the country in terms of prosperity, the commonality between them is educational attainment. And when I look at Metro Milwaukee, we're at about 34.5% of our adult population has a 4-year degree or better, but only 14% of the Hispanic population has a bachelor's degree or better. So as the work that HERA is doing is critical to helping close that gap. And our goal is to really focus on providing more quality seats in the K-12 space in the city of Milwaukee to make sure that we get more of our Hispanic and Latino talent in quality schools that put them in a position to go to and through 2- and 4-year institutions. And then the final area is really wealth creation, using corporate partnerships and entrepreneurial mentoring to grow the wealth in the Hispanic and Latino communities. And so those are the 3 pathways. We've got some very clear metrics and goals laid out. We've got a 5-year pathway to accomplish this. And the Hispanic Collaborative, again, not only being physically located, but sharing this information back and forth, I think is really going to help us accelerate the work and reach these goals that are critical, not only to the Hispanic and Latino community, but they're critical to the prosperity of Milwaukee. Of the 20 there are only 16 regions in the United States that for the past 45 years have been in the top 25 for per capita income. Milwaukee is one of those regions, but what's holding us back and what's going to accelerate us is our ability to make sure that the Hispanic and Latino community is prepared for, has the opportunities to, and engages in the economic prosperity, either through educational attainment, through advancement in companies, or through the creation of wealth. And if we can do that, then I'm confident we have a really bright 2021 and years ahead of us. So Nancy, I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Tim. A really great overview of what's happening at the MMAC and your leadership with these 110 companies. We do have one quick question for you, which is the increase of 25% in the manager base sounds fantastic, although we're starting from a low number. What can we do, or what kind of strides could we do early on, do you think, that would encourage businesses to chew off a bigger percentage so we could really, you know, could that, I think you mentioned 600, could that be 2,000, right? What can we do in partnership with you to help make that happen?
Yeah, certainly. And it's an aspirational goal. It's not meant as a ceiling. And we put that goal in place because we look back the past 10 years. And if we're able to achieve this goal collectively, it will move Milwaukee forward in twice the gain in half the time. So again, fair question. It may not be aspirational enough, but what we can do again is work with companies to make sure that any of the internal barriers that are there are broken down, that there's a sharing of best practices, that there's an opportunity to promote within the companies. And then as you and I have talked, there's the ability to upskill, to move people into skill sets that help them move up in those companies. And then clearly, as we look out on a longer term basis, we've got to increase the number of high school graduates that are prepared to go to 2-year and 4-year institutions, because that's really the pipeline and that's the ladder up into these companies beyond just that first job.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim. Thank you so much for that overview. We are going to go to our last presenter, last certainly but not least. Before we go into breakout, so I want to remind you that we will have breakouts after this next presentation to talk about what you heard today and start, I guess, digesting some of that and talking about what we can do from an action standpoint from the collaborative. And if all of these organizations help reach their goals with these initiatives, you can see how this umbrellas directly into the work that we're doing at the Hispanic Collaborative and what we want to see for our community. So our next presenter is Nicole Angresano, who is the Vice President of Community Impact at United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. She is, in other words, the lady, one of two fantastic ladies, but the lady over at United Way. And although you don't necessarily see Nicole everywhere, she is everywhere in terms of the work that her and her team do at United Way. I will share that United Way was one of the first investors in direct assistance during this pandemic to Latino communities, especially those households that did not have access to any other financial resources during this time frame. And we thank you for your leadership, for you and at the United Way, Nicole, for doing that. And that really helps a lot of families get through this time frame. So thank you for that. Nicole Angresano is going to talk about something called I always say tech equity, but it's not, it's Techquity. So I have to get that right. But I've got your deck up and ready to go when you are, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for having me here today, for getting to present with these other tremendous leaders. Love hearing about the work that's going on, both at the GMC and the MMAC. And if there were people before that, I might have dismissed it because I came from another call, but really happy to hear what Julia and Tim were sharing. Happy to have this opportunity to share a piece of our equity work with this group. And what Nancy neglected to mention earlier is that the entire idea for direct aid came from Nancy. And if you have a board of directors and you don't have Nancy on it, you should fix that immediately, because she is a tremendous board member, not a board member in name only, but a board member that does the work. And so she's always bringing me great ideas and introducing me to the best people and affording me the best opportunities. So I'm really grateful for that. But in our time together today, I do want to talk to you about Techquity. It's going to start rolling off the tongue, Nancy, when you say it a few more times. So you've heard already about myriad equity-related issues that are facing our community, particular impact on our Black and Brown community members, whether it's health, education, or financial stability. Most social, economic, and educational outcomes are not going as well for our people of color, for our populations of color. One of the issues that United Way noticed early on in the pandemic, and I want to be very clear, this is not a new issue, but I think what COVID has forced us to, and I say that in a good way, it's certainly, I think, made us better funders, is really examine those places where inequities not only are growing because of this pandemic, but where we can really do something about it quickly to bridge a gap. So on the next slide, you'll see a little context around what are we talking about when we talk about this digital divide. And again, this isn't a new condition, but here's what's a little bit different. So the digital divide refers to sort of the haves and the haves not in terms of who has a computer and internet access at home. And for a long time, the perception was that having internet access, having a computer, those were luxury items, right? If you had one, you were lucky, great. You didn't really need one. You could go to the library and use it. We know that's not the case. It's not the case, one, because we don't have those public opportunities to use the internet right now, but we live in a different world. We live in a digital world. And all of us on this call right now, I suspect, are doing this either from home or your office where you have digital access. Some of us have children at home who, I think he's not in class anymore, but ostensibly are in school online, many of us. This is a necessity. We believe that internet access should be treated as though it's a utility where everyone has access to have it. Everyone has the opportunity to have it, regardless of zip code or capacity to pay. And although many of our efforts so far have been focused on the central city, please note there are significant challenges in terms of connections in our outer counties, in our rural areas, and with those residential facilities that serve people experiencing homelessness and senior citizens. On the next slide, you'll see how COVID really has exacerbated and maybe increased the lens on this issue area. Not only, and I know many of us can relate to the need right now to have technology for school access and work access, but how do you even get a job right now if you don't have internet access? How do you keep a job that maybe you can only keep if you're able to use the internet at home? How do seniors stay in touch with family members and home visitors when those family members and home visitors can't come? And in some even more serious conditions, we know that having access to computer service and cell phones can be a matter of life and death when you're talking about people who have been victims of domestic and intimate partner violence. So we need to do our part to bridge that divide. On the next slide, you'll see what we decided to do about it. This is a collective impact initiative to bridge the digital divide. Our wonderful Technology United network supported us back in March, saying we have to do something about this, both in the short term and the long term. We need to make sure that we use United Way's capacity to connect the dots between human and financial capital and those needs, so that every family has digital devices and internet access, that we're going to continue to foster digital literacy and career pathways. And then ultimately, when we're able to pivot from emergency needs, we can start thinking about the use of technology to accelerate innovation. Next slide, please. Our priorities in the immediate were the following: households with school-aged children and shelters and residential facilities that included families with school-aged children. We have to make sure that as many kids as possible have access to online learning. I know some of you live in districts where there's still a hybrid model or an in-person model. Some of us are in schools that are completely virtual. And in the absence of having a high quality computer or internet access, many of our children, particularly those in the central city where there are already deep educational inequities, will fall even further behind. So at a bare minimum, we need to make sure those households have a computer. We want to make sure that persons seeking employment or enrolled in adult education and credentialing programs have access. Imagine being in the middle of earning your GED or your HSED and suddenly not being able to drop into Literacy Services of Wisconsin to use their computers. How are you going to continue that trajectory? We know that for many adult learners, if you stop, if for some reason you get derailed, either due to economics or illness, or in this case, COVID, you may not go back. So we need to do whatever we can to keep you on that path. I mentioned vulnerable populations, such as those experiencing intimate partner violence and homelessness, and also our social service agencies. So some of our investments really were just to make sure that shelters and those providers that remained open during this pandemic had the internet service that they needed. Next slide. Our strategies since April have included the purchase and distribution of new computers, internet service, and programs including hotspots. We have done a facilitation of safe and secure hardware donations from our corporate partners. So places like We Energies in Rockwell donated computers to us. We used our partners at Digital Bridges to wipe those computers clean. And that's a technical term and needs to be done by someone that's licensed to do it because of security issues. We then turn those computers around and give them back out into the community. That's not instead of new, that's in addition to, which makes our impact even broader. We have done community-led programmatic investments in digital equity and access, including increasing Wi-Fi signals at nonprofit agencies and providing hotspots. We've offered skill-based volunteer experiences, and ultimately we want to work on policy and systems change, like I mentioned earlier, which is really the ultimate goal: universal broadband access for everyone. A couple of things that we've achieved to date on the next slide: over 100 laptops and desktops for nonprofit agency partners, 200 pairs of headphones for students, laptops and Chromebooks for all the students at 12 Milwaukee community schools, another one of our equity initiatives, 180 hotspots for members of the community to access the internet, improved internet service, like I mentioned, at our shelters and other agencies that remain open, and cell phones preloaded with 6 months of data service for people experiencing homelessness and or domestic violence, to make sure that they were able to stay in contact with case managers and family members so they could navigate this difficult time. And again, while COVID has placed all of us under unusual stress and unusual circumstances, for our vulnerable populations, that stress is exacerbated when you don't have access to the basic things that you need to stay employed, to stay on track in school, to stay safe. And that's what we're working on through Techquity. So that was a very short dive into an initiative that we're super excited about. And again, I want to give so much credit to folks, to Tina Chang and others who have been lifting and boosting the signal about this issue and this gap for years. This is United Way's part to do some really immediate alleviation of gaps, to really reach those families that we believe are in immediate need of having a computer and internet service. But we have a lot more work to do, and we're going to do that in partnership with some of you on this call and with the city and the county, to ensure, again, that we no longer treat the internet like a luxury item, but like the necessity that it is.
Thanks so much, Nicole. This was a great presentation, and great to see you guys hard at work at this and making an impact on it. We do have one quick question for you, which is, this sounds like a fantastic initiative. How can it be scaled for greater reach?
It's a great question, and we've been working on it. You know, I neglected in my presentation to mention the extraordinary and robust efforts of Milwaukee Public Schools to do their own Chromebook distribution. So I want to both acknowledge that and indicate that we're doing that in partnership with them. But, you know, really, as we look towards scaling this, it's about, first of all, understanding the scope of the problem. So we know what we know. We know that there are school children that have needs. When we have an agency partnership, we become aware of what their families and their clients have. But there's a bunch of people without internet access that we might not know about yet. And so it behooves us to follow the path like your collaborative and do robust community surveys and analysis to find out what the full scope of the problem is, not just in Milwaukee, but in our outer counties. And then how do we address that both through short, medium, and long-term solutions? So I don't mean to punt that other than to say we know very little right now and we need to know more. Thank you so much, Becky. I see that you're dropping into the chat room about the state broadband office, and we're very pleased that the governor has also commissioned a group of folks to get together and study this. So we know that we are one piece in a much bigger puzzle, and that it's going to take business leaders and government leaders to really address this critical gap.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Nicole, again, for giving us that briefing. And digital literacy, digital equity, both from an equipment standpoint, a connectivity standpoint, and a standpoint of knowledge in order to be able to function, whether it's from an application standpoint, whether it's from applying for resources, connecting, leveraging online tools. All of that is very, very important to the financial stability of households, the upskilling and reskilling, the education side, and the business side. And so this is something that strings all throughout our recovery plan. And we heard a lot about its relationship to the success of other outcomes on it. So it is something that we continue to try to keep our eye on and push and share both within the Hispanic community and outside what resources are available there. We are going to go into, I'm going to share our screen and I'll walk you through what's going to happen. So in just a few minutes, we're going to go into our breakouts. It is about 4:30 and we will give you 15 or 20 minutes into your breakout sessions. And these are the questions that we want you to cover. So the first thing that we want you to do is assign one person to take some notes. It doesn't have to be super detailed notes, but we're going to ask each of your group note takers to add that to the chat for everyone to see when we reconvene back in from our breakout groups. But these are the questions that we want you to cover. How can we ensure, having heard these 4 initiatives, and there are others out there, that we will work to give you a glimpse into them and understand them and what's happening in our community. But how can we ensure that our Hispanic community helps shape these initiatives that you heard about with our input, our voice, our information, our access to community? All of that is going to be vitally important to make sure that that these initiatives can move their goals forward and that Latinos are included in that success. The second area that we want you to talk about is, which of these do you feel are most important for the work moving Milwaukee into a top 10 city on the Hispanic Wellbeing Index? So which of them do we need to pay? And they're all very, very important, but certainly COVID-19 has added a different lens to us. And we know that sometimes we need to juggle priorities, or that dominoes need to fall in different ways. So we really want your input on which of these is important to our work from a well-being index standpoint. And then we also bringing it down to what we try to focus on each of these meetings, which is action. Which of these regional initiatives do you personally want to be more actively involved with? So we'd like you to have some discussion about that. There might be some of these that dovetail into things that you're working on either personally or through your organizations. And are you going to be, want to get more involved in that? So we at the collaborative want to continue to play our role of convener and connect you with that. So the questions, we posted these into the chat room, and you should see we have you going into 5 different breakout rooms, and that's going to pop up on your screen. Shortly. So we want you to accept that you are going into those breakouts. We'll see you back in a few minutes.